All right.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening for our friends in India. My name is Robert Schmid, and I am Mr. IoT. I work for Deloitte Digital, and this is our inaugural Coffee with Mr. IoT. Hey, do you guys have coffee like me? I got coffee. Where's your coffee, guys?
I'm doing decaf myself.
I'm having decaf. Okay, well, welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT. As I said, it's our first go, and today I have with me Dan Rhodes and Thaddeus Zaharos. Thaddeus, how did I say this? Did I do okay?
You did. You are well trained. That's right.
Why don't you guys do a quick intro, and then I'll take it from there. I'd love to have you guys introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So this is Thaddeus Zaharos. I'm a senior manager based in Austin, Texas, and I am our Internet of Things offering chief of staff.
Welcome, Thaddeus. Thanks for joining. Dan?
Yeah, I'm Dan Rhodes. I'm a specialist leader, and I'm a whole 8 weeks into my Deloitte IoT experience. So, yeah, so far so good.
8 weeks. I thought it was a month. Man, time flies when you have fun.
I know.
Welcome, Dan. So my name is Robert Schmid, and I also go by Mr. IoT. It's a little nickname I gave myself. And if you're interested, there's actually a video out there that we did on YouTube. It's called Mr. IoT, and it's the new guy. And this is how I felt when I rejoined Deloitte about a year ago. I was actually a client of Deloitte for a while. I was the CEO at Activision Blizzard, and so I've the pleasure of had the experience of being both a consultant as well as a client. But when I came back to Deloitte, I started working on IoT. And I felt like the new guy, and that video was very fitting. So if you want to have a funny video, check it out there. It's on YouTube under Mr. IoT. You can also see it on my YouTube channel if you want to check it out. So Thaddeus, question for you. I'm leading the IoT practice. We started this up last year. We created a separate IoT practice because we've had about 40, 50 projects already that all fall into the IoT category, but we didn't really have a focus group. Now we do. You've helped us set it up. Tell us a little bit, how is it to set it up, and tell people what we do so they get an idea about our IoT practice.
Right. Well, we're definitely still in the setup and growth phase. I think we will be in the growth phase for quite a while. We're seeing a lot of new, exciting projects across industries and a lot of different use cases, so that's really, really interesting. I think there's probably going to be a lot more new use cases to come. The interesting thing and the unique thing about Deloitte is, we do a lot of things that are completely unlike and unrelated to IoT. So we go to market by industry, and we have people that are focused in analytics. That's all they do. That's their area of specialty. We have people focused in finance. That's what they do. So we have a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different capabilities, a lot of different domains of focus. And so when we think about IoT and how we can help our clients with that, we don't just think about IoT. We think about the other aspects of the business that might intersect with IoT. And a lot of what we do, a lot of my time actually has to do with making the broader firm aware of what our IoT capability is and bringing those people into our discussions with our clients. So the conversations we have with our clients generally can be very, very rich. And some of those interactions include people from our security and advisory practice, people from our analytics practice, and quite a few others. So a lot of what I do has to do with connecting people and helping people find each other.
How long have you been with us now, Thaddeus? Because I remember the times before you, and I remember how times were hard before you. So how long have you been with us now?
Well, the us
both
being
with Deloitte and IoT. Sorry.
Yes. So I've been part of the IoT offering now for a couple of months, but I've been with the firm for most of the last 15 years. So quite a bit of history with the firm. Yeah.
How is, by the way, we keep calling it IoT, and maybe we should mention that what we mean is the Internet of Things, everything connected, or some things connected to the Internet. How is IoT, the Internet of Things practice, different from what you've done before? That is.
Well, one of the interesting things about IoT, Internet of Things, is that there's a big ecosystem that's involved. So, if you're thinking about an Internet of Things deployment or capability in a company, it's not like a finance group, for example, where you've got a finance department. The the Internet of Things really requires an ecosystem of partners, and you might have some aspects of that ecosystem are embedded well within your organization, but very certainly there's going to be some aspects of that ecosystem that are not. You know, there may be professional services you provision, there may be hardware vendors you're working with, maybe software vendors. It's that for me is very different because in my history, where I come from, at least in other areas of the firm, we weren't so ecosystem driven, but IoT is very different that way. There's a lot of partners for us to coordinate with. There's a lot of new vendors to look at and keep track of. So that's what's different for me.
Thanks, Thaddeus. By the way, so first of all, on your left, I think I'm pointing the right way for you, there is a QA button. So what that means is you can go and you can ask questions. So Parag just asked a question. I'm not sure why I'm not visible. Anyways, I'm following live talk. So Parag, the way this works is that you get to watch us talk. We get to ask each other questions. And if you have questions for us, please click on that QA, ask the questions, and we'll try to answer it. So thanks, Parag. Welcome. It's good to have you. Thaddeus, you made an interesting comment about the ecosystem. I always say there is no ERP for IoT, which basically means there's no one vendor. And it's really interesting for me, having worked with ERP vendors for so long. It's a very different life, isn't it? Dan, you are new to us, and you came from a place of doing IoT for a long time. You had your own company. You worked with people actually designing chips and sensors. What do you think about that whole ecosystem question? What comes up for you?
Yeah, it's a really cool time. Like, so when I first got into IoT, it was before the term IoT. This was back in like 2000, 99, 2000 time frame. So back then, you didn't have near the horsepower that you do today that you can bring to a device, right? I mean, back then we gathered data on a basically a PC and sent it over phone lines back to a server running in our IT room, right? Today you've got cellular modems, you've got all these wireless technologies, you've got microcontrollers that have tons of horsepower, you've got all kinds of new sensor technologies, and you've got the cloud. So I think right now we're at a point where all that stuff is coming together, and we're trying to scramble just to keep up with it all, right? I mean, things are progressing so quickly that we are always learning how to take advantage of the new technology, right? So it's a really exciting time.
Dan, I have this theory, and I wonder if you agree with this. My theory is that the biggest competitor to IoT platform vendors, IoT hardware vendors, even network vendors is the Raspberry Pi or Arduino, or whichever one you want to go with. But people just go get that little device, buy it. It's cheaper than the actual Raspberry Pi, which always blows my mind. And then they just do something with it. Do you agree with that? What do you think about this? What's the problem with that approach?
It has its place. So you know, there's this whole theory about how you go about putting together an IoT system, right? And you can get lost in analysis and system design, and you can analyze like crazy and design the perfect system before you ever do anything. But the best thing about the Raspberry Pis and the Arduinos and the BeagleBone boards is you can get a board for $50. You can quickly program it up. You can go buy a cellular eval kit and plug that into it, and you're off and running, right?
Does that scale?
No, it doesn't. So it's great for.
So where does it run out? How far can I take this? When do I have to? And where's the place for it? You said it has its place.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
So anytime you do an IoT project, you got to figure out what your R&D schedule is, right? And to do that, you have to answer the hard questions about your application. So you go out, you buy a Raspberry Pi, you cobble something together to see how this is all going to play together, which is basically your very first proof of concept prototype. From there, you have to get something into production. You have to make a manufacturable device. And that's where you have to move away from the Raspberry Pi. But, you know, if you do things right, if you write the software for your Raspberry Pi board in the right way, your firmware is totally portable. you can do a custom design and really minimize the pain of integrating that proof of concept firmware onto your actual purpose-built device. So they're great for prototyping, but you really can't do a production device with them that scales.
Got it. It's interesting, you talk about something we call in the Tech Trends 2016. Andy Decker and I wrote an article in our Deloitte Tech Trends 2016, which is called From Sensing to Doing. And in that, we talk about the approach, and we call it Think Big, Start Small, Scale Fast. And what I'm seeing right now is lots of people think big. I see quite a few people starting small, and I haven't seen very many scale fast. And the interesting shift I've seen the last year is that about a year ago I saw a lot of people thinking. Today I see a lot of people starting small. But what I also see is they start small, as you described, with a Raspberry Pi, and now they can't scale. And so what we've done around this is we've created a few frameworks, specifically the reference architecture. That is, you just want to talk a little bit about this, just introduce the frameworks, our information value loop, and the reference architecture at a high level, and just tell us why we did that. Just might be interesting for to share.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and it's a lot easier when you have the
actual slide.
When you have the slide in front of you. So I'll talk about it in a way that hopefully makes it easy for people to visualize a little bit. But one of the slippery slopes that you can get into with the starting small, it's so easy to get started, right? There's very few barriers to entry. Is that a lot of times people get started piloting without, there's really no defined end to the pilot. It's just we're gonna toy, we're gonna tinker, we're gonna see what we can make in our mad scientist laboratory of IoT sensors and devices. And so what we said was, let's put together a framework that actually it starts with sensors. It starts with data. You start collecting data about devices, people, behaviors, movement, things like that. So say you have sensors and you have data. Well, what do you then do with it? And so in our framework, we talk about the information value loop going from having data and sensors to analytics. I mean, once you have that data, that is success. That can be a pilot in and of itself, but what do you do with that data? The idea then is to actually do some analysis with it to try to tease out some sort of business relevant insight. And then once you have that, you ultimately drive a decision and an action. And so that's kind of the loop, is that the loop starts with data and sensors, and it goes through analytics, and of course a lot of things happen to it during that analytics phase, but that loop, I don't think it's fair to say terminates, but if you do one complete cycle on that loop, it ends with informed decision and action. So the reason we put that together was help guide people's thinking around what if I'm going to pilot, where might I take that pilot, what might be a good endpoint for me to define within that pilot, and of course the framework kind of helps guide that a little bit. Yeah.
I always talk about how in the loop, many people think the value is just in having a sensor, but often when you look at the loop, you'll find that there is value to be had in the sensor, in the network, in the standards, and the security, and in the augmented reality and all the analytics behind it. So, it breaks this saying. All the values in the data, for example. People often repeat that, and I'd argue the value is to be found all around. So I almost feel like that is both the information value loop and the reference architecture might deserve its own coffee with Mr IoT. We should talk to Michael Reyna, who came up with the value loop, and see what we do around this. And for the reference architecture, which you didn't talk about, but we're in version 2 of it, and it really takes the different components and talks through. There is no ERP for IoT, and it takes the different vendors and maps them into each different boxes. Some of them go in multiple boxes, obviously, but it really helps to design a scalable system. Dan, anything you want to add on the reference architecture?
Yeah, it's a really important, I think, concept because a lot of people, it's like you said, a lot of people just think about the sensor or the data, right? But it's really a system, and it's a system that includes both devices, it includes networks, it includes analytics, it includes business issues, right? So unless you really take a holistic approach to putting together your IoT system or entering the IoT space, you may fall short in a critical area, and that'll hurt the success of your project. So it's very important to take that whole holistic approach.
So I have a question that's totally not IoT related, or maybe it is, but I look around, all three of us are sitting in our home offices. It's Friday, we all work from home. I'm curious, Thaddeus, just tell people a little bit about it, why that is. I mean, is this what we always do? Maybe you can talk a little bit about 345 also. I think it's valuable for people to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I guess the answer to that question for me personally, I presume, is the same answer for the two of you, and that is that, well, I mean, maybe I shouldn't presume that, but for me, super busy schedule, ambitious on any given day of the week in terms of what I'm trying to get done, and, commuting can eat up a good chunk of the day, so I kind of look at what I want to accomplish, and in some cases, I'm going to make the decision to work from home because it is essential for me to be able to get, what I want to get done. To be able to do that realistically, I mean, I can save a ton of time by working from home. Now, Deloitte has a program called 345 where, if you typically travel week to week and you fly to a client site, you will typically follow what's called a 345 schedule, which means you'll be away 4 days. 3 of those are on the 5th day of the week. You're basically home. So this would be my 5th day of the week. So I think you're traveling 3 nights. You're away for a total of 4 days, and your 5th day you're home. And so that's kind of one thing we do to try to establish a little bit of work-life balance for people who travel a lot. Is it gives them some flexibility to be at home during the week. Yeah.
Yeah, I realized I had a very non-proud fact that on Wednesday I realized the last 6 days I've spent 4 days on an airplane having my main meal. So that was a little sad. But I'm glad to be home today. And so, yeah. Dan, I looked at your picture before. There's some guitars back there. Are you a big guitar player?
Yeah, yes I am. There's a lot more back there that you can't see. Gets me out of trouble.
Are there any sensors? Are there sensors back there too of some sort?
Not right now, but there have been for sure.
That would be a cool project to actually IoT enable some of your guitars. That would you could probably get some interesting data off of those. Yeah,
absolutely. There's stuff out now that lets you sense all kinds of things on instruments and collaboration over the internet and all that stuff. So it's fun.
So Dan, I heard that not only do you play the guitar, but there's actually a hobby with amplifiers too. Tell us about this, and after that, just tell us how it's been to be switching from a small company to Deloitte. Just give us a little bit of your thoughts.
Yeah. So when I was young, my dad was into antique radios and restoring radios. So that's how I learned electronics. Is actually building with vacuum tubes, and it's a lot different. So with IoT devices and modern electronics, you're at 1.8 volts or 3.3 volts, but with those I get to work with 500, 600, 800 volts. So it keeps you sharp. Plus you get to rock out through it when you're done. So can't complain about that. But yeah, I mean, coming to Deloitte, it was kind of a hard decision for me. So I had a consulting company for 8 years where I developed cellular IoT products. Worked for myself, loved working for myself, but really what I found was, I was just a guy. I came into consulting after getting laid off and had these big dreams of building a company and hiring employees, and quickly realized that I'm kind of a control freak, and so I didn't hire anybody. So I was just a guy, right? And it worked out really well for me, but I hit a ceiling in terms of the size of engagement that I could go after. So, I helped primarily startups and small companies get an IoT product up and running and architect their IoT systems. So, the attraction for me to Deloitte was number one, it was still a consulting role, and number two, I can go after projects now that are groundbreaking, with big companies and really kind of have an impact, because right now, there's a lot of in IoT, there's a lot of talent, but there aren't a lot of us that have experience, right, over a long time, knowing what works and what doesn't. So, I feel like at Deloitte I can make a real contribution there. So.
Well, welcome. It's good to have you. Thanks for joining us. Dan, last thing for you. Do you want to pitch? You have a white paper coming up. What's that about?
Yeah. So basically, it looks at mobile wireless protocols for IoT devices. So if you have a device that has to go live in the world and send its data back to the cloud, how does number one, what are the communication technologies that are out there that will allow that? And it really compares them and shows you how to choose which is appropriate for your application. So a lot of times the communications technology is really one of it's the key design component to the system, right? And a lot of stuff revolves around that. And so by really spending time thinking about that choice, it illuminates a lot of things about your device as well as your cloud application and the whole system. So that should be coming out in a few weeks.
It's fantastic. It's one of the things I get asked almost every time I meet with a new client. So that's awesome. Thanks, Dan, for doing this. Thaddeus, any closing thoughts before we talk about next week?
I don't have any closing thoughts, I guess. Thank you for the invite, Robert. And I'm looking forward to some additional invites. So I'm happy to support and have coffee with Mr. IoT.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. So next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about our three industries we've done the most work in. We're going to talk about manufacturing, we're going to talk about retail, and we're going to talk about life science and healthcare. I believe next week is manufacturing, but I have to check. In any case, I'd like to have you back every week. Join us. This is Mr. IoT, Coffee with Mr. IoT. Thank you for having us, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.